And hello, and welcome to the Weekday Warriors of Wrestling, being recorded on May 1st, 2020, actually like an hour after the Kentucky Derby just finished. So I have to say, we'll obviously, we're going to talk wrestling, we're going to talk AEW, we're going to talk Blood and Guts, we're going to talk Roman Reigns' new theme song, we're going to talk all that fun stuff. But I have to say, Patrick, it is super cool to be back, like having sporting events like on and existing, because we had some friends over today. Everybody was fully vaccinated, but and when I say friends, I mean we had a couple and their daughter over, and we had the Kentucky Derby on. There's 51,000 people there. People are wearing masks, but I'm just like, this is super cool. Golf is on the other channel. Mets and Yankees are playing. It's cool to have this stuff happening again, because as you remember, as we all remember from 1 year ago, April and May was depressing. Like, it felt like nothing was really happening. We were all in a holding pattern. So, seeing this stuff and seeing how it's going makes me hopeful for the future, and it also makes me hopeful for live wrestling soon, where real fans are there, and I think that moment can't come soon enough.
We're taking baby steps. We've already had WrestleMania with a crowd, which was great to see. More and more sports are coming back, because I'll be honest, when that first started, when all the lockdowns and everything first began, that was the thing I felt the most almost immediately, because sports is usually an escape from the everyday problems of the world. So when the everyday problems of the world creep in and basically infect all live sports, that leaves me completely screwed, because there's no escape from it. It's just constant reminders of it everywhere, and even having the sports with an empty crowd is just further reminder that the world is fucked up. So you can't really get away from it. So the closer we get to normalcy and getting those type of events back, I think would be nothing short of fantastic.
And it makes me feel better, because so you're in the DC area. I'm in New York. I'm seeing the COVID cases for New York, and they're dropping, they're plummeting, and we're not there yet, but we're in the direction where we're hopefully going to be where cases were over the summer, which was almost non-existent. But what I remember is during the summer was nothing was open. People weren't going to Mets games, they weren't going to Knicks games. Everything's open right now. Like the mayor just said that by July 3rd, I think July 3rd, New York is going to be open for business. And I think that's great. Hopefully we have enough people that get vaccinated. I mean, well, there are some crazies out there, but I think that's great, and it's nice seeing these things drop while we have sporting events open, while we have like Madison Square Garden is open for business. So it's positive to see, and we've talked about this. Like, I don't think we've ever seen anything like the COVID era of pro wrestling, but I don't think there's anyone who's going to look back on this fondly, and being like, man, I remember when nobody was in the building, and we I'm just ready for it to get started. I actually have tickets to. I was going to be at the original Blood and Guts, which was supposed to take place in Newark in March 2020. Of course, it got canceled and postponed. That's set for September, and I think September is going to be doable for live crowds. So, I mean, quite honestly, I think by August, AEW will start touring again. WWE, took a big step with WrestleMania, but it's going to be interesting to see when these brands start live touring again, because I think there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand for these things. I think you're going to have a fired-up crowd for these shows. It'll be interesting to see when they actually do it.
Yeah, well, I think you're starting to see it little by little with all the sports that are coming back, and even movie theaters. I mean, I was as surprised as anybody when I heard Godzilla vs. Kong did as well as it did, and I think that's the perfect movie to just introduce to a group of people who are just desperate for any kind of entertainment and getting away from what we've been putting up with for over a year. So I think fans will absolutely be rabid, hungry, and ready for whatever AEW and WWE decide to provide.
Yeah. And Yeah, we're gonna see. We're gonna preview Blood and Guts. Actually, so we were actually about to have this conversation on the air. Sorry, off the air, and I said, "Oh, I'll save it on the air," because I think like I've noticed through the comments on our YouTube videos and such that we do have a fair number of movie fans, and like people like to hear about Godzilla. They when we talk about horror movies and stuff, they get into that. So I asked you earlier, you do not have a Shudder subscription, correct?
I do not. Nope.
So I'm a big horror fan. I'm not a huge. Sorry. I'm a decently sized horror fan. Let's put it that way. And you know, a very specific type of horror. Like I love 80s horror. I love like the classics. I love like 80s slasher movies. We've talked about my love of Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, things like that. The one thing I've always established, it's the one thing I will not accept in horror movies is dogs getting killed. If you fucking kill a dog in your horror movie, I will not watch your movie. I think it's fucking garbage. I will watch you kill. You can kill children in your movies. If you kill a dog, fuck you.
I'll ask a stupid question. I'll ask this question. Have you ever seen A Fish Called Wanda?
Yes, and I don't like it. For that reason. Okay. I do. You know what? I do not like. For the most part, there are exceptions, and there are movies where dogs or animals and stuff get killed, and I think it's. And in a lot of cases, I think it's fine or whatever. But like for some reason, when it's like mean spirited and I don't get it or appreciate it, and it's just done for shock value. I don't like it. I love Kevin Kline in that movie. For some reason, like, and it's not like that doesn't disturb me. There's one movie that does this. I won't name it because I don't want to give it any credit. There's one movie that does disturb me. Fish Called Wanda is not it, but I don't like that joke. I don't think it's like that great. But anyway, so I have Shudder, which is a horror streaming service. It's for $5.99 a month. By the way, we are not sponsored by Shudder or or anyone. By the way, I'm doing this of my own accord. But they have a lot of cool stuff on there. If you ever watched, so here's a great wrestling connection. If you watched WCW on TNT, you probably saw ads for Monster Vision, which was a super fun show that TNT would do on like Saturday nights, and they would show they would do Godzilla movies, they would do like Phantasm or Hellraiser or like
I remember them doing Friday the 13th marathon.
Yeah, they did Friday the 13th marathon. So they do a ton of horror movies, and they had Joe Bob Briggs, who's this who's a film critic who created this like redneck persona who in real life is actually very knowledgeable about horror films, and he would like host the show, and you could call in or send him actual mail, believe it or not. Now they do tweets, but you know, and he'd answer questions and stuff in between the breaks and have like, you know, silly stuff. So they've got Joe Bob Briggs on there, and they do The Last Drive, and they'll do it live Fridays, and you can watch movies and stuff. But they've got two things that I wanted to give a lot of credit to. Number one, they have this thing. It actually just ended. It's May 1st, but they'll do it again in October, and they did it in April for halfway to Halloween month. But what you can do is, if you have a Shudder subscription, you can call. Well, I mean, I guess you don't need a Shudder subscription to do this, but you can give them a call on Fridays between 3 and 4 p.m. and their head of like one of their heads of like content and curator of their things will give you like movie recommendations based on what they had. So I like called up at like 3:15 p.m. yesterday, and I was like, "Hey, I'm in this mood," and I was like, and he gave me a recommendation for a film that was it's basically these Irish like kind of kids, and they unknowingly release a vampire, and they have to stop him. I said I was like in an adventurous mood, like for like a Lost Boys Goonies type thing, and this is what he gave me. And so I thought that was a really cool feature. And on top of that, they have a TV series called Creep Show, which is based on the Creep Show from the 80s and stuff. And I will say this, the acting is not very good. The writing is okay at best. But what they do is a fucking great job with practical effects. The showrunner is Greg Nicotero, who you'll know from The Walking Dead, and he also did a lot of like, He did stuff. He was on Day of the Dead, I think, as a special effects designer. But they do some really fucking cool practical effects on this show. Most of it is practical. Like, there's an episode and there's like a fucking evil genie. There's one where there's these like parasitic worms, and like the puppets look cool as shit. And I'm just like, this is like fucking 80s horror, and it gives me like Nightmare on Elm Street, it gives me Goonies, it gives me Invaders from Mars like style flashbacks, and it's super cool. So my recommendation is for you, Patrick, and for anyone listening, if you dig like 80s style horror, like this show is like, I'm not going to call it like a great show or anything, but if you dig practical effects from the 80s, it's probably the closest you're going to get. So I really enjoyed that, and there's a fair amount of like a variety of horror on there. So it's I've been enjoying that for that purpose.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I'm a pretty big horror fan myself, and I'm always on the lookout for new and exciting horror. We went through that drought for the longest time where all that was coming out was just found footage stuff, which there are good found footage horror movies, but when that's all there is, it becomes tiring very quick. So I was really happy to see like a bunch of new horror movies, and especially at the independent level, like come up and become bit classics in my eyes. I was a really big fan of the Babadook. I really liked Oculus. Quiet Place was one that I really enjoyed. So it sounds like this service, it has a bunch of old horror, classic stuff, and there's a bunch of new stuff on there that I've never even found. So I'm always on the lookout for new horror, so I'll be sure to check this out now that I've had you recommended to me, and I've had a few other people. So it sounds worth my while.
Yeah, and like yeah, I mean, you like you're talking about that drought. Like there was that long time period where it was found footage, and there's a fair amount of good found footage stuff. And then there was that torture porn era, which I'm just like,
oh, the Saw movies.
Yeah, and like Hostel, and like, I mean, I like Eli Roth as a human. Like, I think if I chatted with him, he and I would have very similar sensibilities. But the movies he makes, I'm not interested in seeing ever. I actually watched. They had Cannibal Holocaust on.
Oh Jesus!
Shudder, which I about 13 years ago, I'm like, oh, I'm going to watch this movie. And for some reason, I was just like, no fucking way. And I turned it off and I returned the videotape. Actually, it's a DVD, but which has some rough stuff on there. Mostly the animal stuff. I like. I actually just fast forward through it. I couldn't watch that part, but I did watch the guy's like dick getting chopped off. It's a brutal movie. But yeah, they got
my favorite thing about that movie is that you're right. It's a very rough movie to sit through, but it got the biggest laugh out of me at the tail end when all the people in the theater are done watching the footage, and the guy gets up, goes over to the phone, is like, I would like to have this footage destroyed, please. Thank you. And that got the biggest laugh out of me. It's like, you know what? It was worth sitting through all of that just to get to that moment.
Those executives in that movie are like the worst people ever. Like they're like first of all, like in real life and in like the stereotype of executives, they're always like, let's just make money. Let's just blah, blah, blah. And these people are like, I mean, they're trying to make money, but the whole time they're just like, oh, they got some really raw, great stuff. I'm like, who the fuck are these people? Like that woman is like insane. They're like, they're clearly like staging this shit and like burning people alive. And you're like, this is good stuff. I'm like, holy fuck. 80s or 70s executives were ruthless. The characters that were like the documentary crew in Cannibal Holocaust are like the worst people ever. They're like terrible. They're like, I mean, it's not like I don't like enjoy them being like eaten alive and stuff, but I'm like, you guys are awful people. Yeah. So okay, so that's enough about that. Let's go to wrestling.
Okay.
We had our go home show for what essentially I guess will be a pay-per-view in Blood and Guts on AEW. Patrick, in your opinion, how do you feel that Dynamite did getting you excited for next week's big show?
I thought they did pretty well. The promo segments that they've done between the Inner Circle and the Pinnacle have really worked for me. And it's kind of not only do you have MJF and Jericho to kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting, but some other guys have kind of surprised me a little bit. Like Shawn Spears came out of his shell a little bit more during the segment this week. Yeah, and Sammy Guevara continues to improve and get better. Santana Ortiz had some interesting things to say. So And it's really funny how like everything's kind of lined up where you have the two leaders, Jericho and MJF, then you have the Muscle, who's Hager and Wardlow, and then you have Spears and Guevara, who are kind of like the in-between secondary guys, the lieutenants. And then you got the tag teams to kind of fill everything out. So it's like there's a perfect, they're almost like bizarro versions of each other. So I kind of like how there's that symmetry there where they line up kind of perfectly. But overall, there's a different kind of personality to each team. And I think that's come across pretty well. And you and I both said last week, I think, that they're kind of rushing doing the Blood and Guts match, but they've got me really excited for it. So I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, so I agree. I think So I agree on both counts. I agree that I'm excited about it and that they've rushed it. Like, part of me is like, shouldn't they be having some big singles matches and stuff? But, you know, like, I mean, I'm not here. Well, I guess two of you agree I'm here too, but I'm not going to talk about business-wise how they're going to milk this. But from a entertainment standpoint, they're doing a great job because, I mean, this I dug this promo segment a lot. I thought MJF and Jericho did a great job, as they always do. I think it's like, it makes me feel old as shit with Jericho being like, you gotta have some respect, kiddo. And like, I'm like, holy shit, I'm old. Like, oh my God, Jericho's like this ancient veteran now. I mean, I know he's been an ancient for a long time, but when you think about it, it's just terrifying. But yeah, I agree. I thought some other guys had some good promo segments. I thought Sean Spears was fine, whatever. But I thought Sammy did a good job. I think Santana and Ortiz did a great job, as they normally do. There's a rawness to them, and there's a like aggression to them that I think is sorely lacking in professional wrestling. I think Eddie Kingston has it too. There's, for the most part, in pro wrestling today, and I don't mean to sound like an old fucking fogey who's like, oh, it used to be good, because like I'm not. But what wrestling could use more of, and used to have a ton in like the 70s and 80s and stuff, is guys that you're afraid could beat the fucking shit out of you. And there's a few people, like, I mean, Brock's a guy like that. We talk about that, but but there's an art, like, Brock could legitimately beat the shit out of you. There's an art to seeming like you can beat the shit out of somebody. Eddie Kingston's a guy who, I don't know if Eddie Kingston can actually fight, but he sure seems like a guy who could, and I don't want to fuck around with him. Santana and Ortiz, proud and powerful. Guys that seem like they would be people I wouldn't want to get in a fight with. And I always use myself as a barometer, because I'm a normal guy. I'm 6'4", so I'm decently tall, but I'm just a normal guy. If I'm like not super afraid of you, like if I see Kip Sabian, I'm like, whatever. But I see like Eddie Kingston or like Brock Lesnar or somebody, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to fucking tangle with these guys. That's my barometer for how tough some of these guys are, at least perceived. So I thought Santana and Ortiz had a great, I thought they had a great promo. I think they come off as violent and angry, and I think that's great, because I think to a degree pro wrestling is always like predicated on kind of an id and kind of a bloodthirsty nature. So I thought that was cool. I thought this promo was great, and I thought it set up for Blood and Guts really, really well.
It's funny you mentioned that type of stuff where, did you watch the Roddy Piper documentary on A&E?
No, I missed, and I wanted to see. They haven't done the Shawn one yet, have they?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, yeah. No, I wanted to see it, but I missed it, yes.
Yeah, the Piper one was great, but they really go into his backstory, and I really found this interesting, like how he lived homeless at one point. He lived on the street and had to fight for food, basically, in his youth. And that kind of came across in Piper through his wrestling character, where you believe that this was a scrappy guy that lived on the streets and would beat up people for food. And that came across in his wrestling personality. And I think guys like Eddie Kingston and Santana and Ortiz kind of give off that same vibe, where you believe that these are guys that maybe had it a little tougher and had to fight a little bit harder, and that comes across in their wrestling personalities.
Yeah. Because
whether or not they actually can fight, I don't know, but it's believable that they could.
Yeah, because you look at these guys, and like, it's funny. We've talked about this before. Like, nowadays, there's a lot of people who are like critics and stuff of wrestling. Like, this guy's too small. This guy's too he's not big enough to be this. You look at the history of wrestling, and you're like, ooh, what about Roddy Piper? What about Ric Flair? What about Randy Savage? What about like Dusty's not particularly like tall, he's big, but what about Bob Backlund? And what they really mean when they say, "Oh, they're too small," they don't mean height wise, because there's been guys since the beginning of time in pro wrestling who haven't been particularly tall. What they mean is they don't look like they could fight you. And I think that's where you see the difference if you take a guy like Darby Allin and you take a guy like Joey Janela. Now, Joey Janela, from a marketing and hustle standpoint, has done a great job with his career. He built himself into an independent attraction, and people go see him, and more power to him. As far as a national level, you look at Joey Janela and you look at Darby Allin, they're maybe the same height. I don't know. Maybe Darby's a little bit taller. I don't know. But Darby does not get complaints about his size, despite the fact he is very small. Why? Because when he wrestles, he comes off tenacious and scrappy and like he's a punk from Seattle, and it all comes together like that. Kip Sabian doesn't have that. Despite the fact he's the same height, there is a difference in charisma, there's a difference in believability. So when old-timers are saying like, "Oh, this guy's too small," well, you know what? Bob Backlund was small, but Bob Backlund had amateur wrestling credentials. Roddy Piper was small. Yeah, but Roddy Piper seemed like a psycho. They don't mean small. They mean there's nothing there that's saying to me, "Wow, I believe you." And
there's a reason why. Sorry to cut you off, but you go back to the WCW cruiserweights. There's a reason why guys like Chris Benoit, he who must not be named, and Eddie Guerrero could make it to the level of a main event world title level, and why guys like Psychosis and and someone like Amazing Red and TNA, why they couldn't. Some guys, their smaller size is front and center, and it's obvious. Other guys, they hit it really well. And Eddie, in particular, was a guy that I forgot was a cruiserweight champion, because he just doesn't seem like a cruiserweight, but he was of that size.
Well, because look at Eddie hitting the frog splash. Look at how aggressive he does it. Look at how and he's doing it safely, but look at how much physicality there is in that. And look at Benoit. I mean, we all Benoit's a monster. I preface that every time. But if we're talking specifically from a wrestling standpoint, Benoit looked like he can kill you, probably because he fucking would. But he looked dangerous, and that's you can. If you can do that, it doesn't really matter how tall you are, because you'll fit into the story somewhere. I mean, Ray is a great example. You mentioned Amazing Red. There's a big difference between Amazing Red and Rey Mysterio Jr. Rey Mysterio, the size is the story. That's the story, right? He's always going to be undersized. And to a degree, Red can do that too, but not to the degree that Ray did. And Darby, despite the fact that Darby is very aggressive and tenacious and stuff, Darby brings that Ray aspect to him too. It's part of the story. He's always the underdog, even though he always wins, right? He's Muggsy Bogues. He's that's a great comparison. Yeah, he's Drew Brees. He's undersized, but he can still win, and that's the story. So, it's interesting. MJF, MJF is I don't know, 5'11", 6 foot maybe. I don't know, but MJF's a heel. MJF's goal is to want to be punched in the face. So there's all sorts of. Flair did that too. Flair was 6 foot 6'1", which at that time was much smaller. Shawn too. If your goal is to get people to want to punch you in the face, you got a different barometer. And
who didn't want to punch Shawn Michaels in the face in the 90s?
I think Triple H wanted to punch Shawn Michaels in the face. Is how I think everybody. But that's switching topics, but that's a heel factor. And there's guys that you can look at. You look at CM Punk in 2011 and 2012 rather. And you're like, oh yeah, some of these guys, MJF I think has it have a punch in face factor, and you get that high enough.
MJF looks like Tony Romo, and I mean that in a good way, because being a Giants fan, I despise Tony Romo.
Yeah,
and that punchable face helped with that. It's like, God, I just want to punch that motherfucker right in the face.
But he's such a good
MJF looks. Yeah, say what?
He's such a good commentator.
Oh, he's probably the best commentator out there today, but as the Dallas Cowboys quarterback, I wanted to punch him right in his goddamn face. And MJF has a very similar face, and I think that helps him out tremendously.
Yeah. All right. Anything else noteworthy on Dynamite this week that you wanted to talk about?
Another major that jumps out at me, a couple setup things. I mean, we've got Britt going for the title at some point. We've got the whole situation with Kenny Omega and Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston in that tag match next week. Gee, I wonder who's taking the pinfall in that one.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was going into this. This is actually one of the most shocked I've been in Dynamites in a while. You had Paige and Cage going against each other, and Hangman's been the number one contender for a while. And so in your mind, you're like, is it going to be Hangman and Kenny? Which is like kind of the eventual point that we're all going to get to, right? But it seems too soon. It's only been like Kenny's only had it for like a pay-per-view and a half. So it seems too early, and you don't want Hangman to lose again, but you also don't want to end Kenny too quickly. So, there's a lot of stuff, excuse me, going down there. And then, of course, Cage beats Hangman. And it's like, oh, I didn't expect that to happen. So that takes him out of contention. That gives him something else. And I thought, to this point, I still don't know what they're going to do with Kenny at Double or Nothing, what the title match is going to be, which is a good thing. I like not being able to see every aspect of the story before it happens, like in some other companies. But, with Hangman, it's like, okay, so now he's going to go with them. So, like, just another thing where I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and we had him on the show back in his Lucha Underground days, but I like Brian Cage a lot, so it was nice to see him get a win, especially over someone the caliber of a Hangman Page, because Cage is somebody I feel like could be like if not top tier, like that 1A level where he could work with the top guys and make them look good, and giving him a big win every once in a while, I think, is a good thing, especially for someone that looks we talked about looking imposing and looking like he could beat the shit out of somebody. Cage has that to him, I think.
Well, he's got kind of the main event Dynamite treatment since he's been there. I mean, he feuded with Moxley for the title kind of as soon as he got there. He feuded with Darby for a bit, and then got the match with Sting, and now he's with Hangman. Like, I mean, that's pretty much like that's as big of a spot as you get. Like, they treated the TNT title like a big deal. Obviously, the world title is a big deal. So, like, I mean, unless they're giving him matches with Cody, like I can't see what else they would do with him.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Speaking of Cody, he came back this week.
Waiting behind the door with the worst camera angle.
Yeah. I think they were trying to, going back to horror movies, I think they were trying to do the Halloween thing, but it just didn't come off well at all.
Well, there's part of me that's like, oh, well, I guess, okay, he's there, he's waiting, it's fine. But, like, I don't know, that was a production mistake that wouldn't happen in WWE. And I was like, oh, yeah. I thought that was good. I liked the brawl on top of the bus. I thought it had kind of like a violent feel to it. I'm just hoping the end game to this isn't Cody and QT Marshall, because I think that sucks. And the other guys, like Camarado is like he's a hoss, man. He's like he's a big, talk about a guy that like you think could kick your ass. That's a guy. And a Go-Go, I think, like he's got that legit street cred of being a boxer. I like the idea that he just punches people in the stomach and ends them. Like, I think that's cool. Yeah. I'm not sold on Solo. I don't think he's has anything, quite honestly. But if you could make 2 stars out of this thing, then cool, great. I think
they're the two main positives of it. Camarado and Agogo. They're the two positives where, a couple weeks ago I didn't really care about them. Now it's like, oh, these guys are pretty interesting. Unfortunately, they're kind of saddled with QT Marshall, who's thoroughly uninteresting, is the best way I can describe him. And
I think he's been better, and I think if you let him just be the talker in the background, it's fine. But if he's gonna like be in there, I don't think that's as good, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of like MVP in a sense, where as a wrestler, I never liked MVP that much. As Lashley's manager, I think he does much better. It's like the best he's ever been.
Yeah, I mean that like. Believe it or not, managers used to be a real thing in professional wrestling, and people gave a shit about them. And AEW's done a great job of creating stars. We talked about it. Like, there are not many stars that are out there. It's not like in the 90s when you had guys like, Warrior and seems like there were more now that I'm saying them, but like it's like there were more like top guys that were able to be gotten from WWE. Brock's seemingly available. I don't know if they're ever going to make a play for him, but okay. Punk's available. I feel like you could grab Batista for enough money. Cena. Who knows? I don't know if he'd ever go there, but there's a few guys. But if you're not going to get those guys, then you need to make your own stars. And as we've seen with Darby Allin, I'm excited for when Darby Allin doesn't have to carry everybody in the main event, because I feel like for the past like 4 or 5 weeks, the main event's been Darby Allin versus some other guy that's not as good as Darby Allin, and they're good because Darby's good, and it's paid off in the ratings. His like segments are always very highly rated, so it's like MJF. Obviously, it's paid off for him. Jungle Boy, Sammy Guevara, I think they're getting there. But like AEW's done a real good job of making new stars. And if Camarado and Agogo are their next two guys, they have a good track record. They have a much better track record than WWE does right now of making,
especially recently.
Yeah. And there's guys you can see with WWE that they're able to rehab Drew's become a major guy recently. I think Seth's new character is going over well, and WWE's done a masterful job with Roman Reigns lately. So there are guys there, but it's certainly not like in the late 90s or the 80s when Vince could just take a guy and say, "Hey, here you go." He can't do that anymore,
There was a time, and I think you and I have talked about it, but a lot of younger listeners may not be aware of this. There was a point in time where Crash Holly could come out and get a gigantic pop. Yeah. That's how over, the WWE roster during the Attitude Era, almost if you couldn't get over in that era, you truly sucked.
Yeah.
That's how crazy it was.
So I remember an episode in the summer of 99. I want to say it was July 99. And it was Jeff Jarrett and D'Lo Brown. Jeff Jarrett was defending the Intercontinental title against D'Lo Brown. Mm-hmm. And this is a title that at that point had been just booked into garbage. I think at that point Shamrock had been the last legit champion, and then he loses it to Val Venus for a quick second, who loses it to Goldust with no build, who loses it to The Godfather with no build, who loses it to Jeff Jarrett out of nowhere, and then Jeff Jarrett, I think, trades house show wins with Edge or something. Anyway, this title has been treated like shit for 6 or 7 months. And Jeff Jarrett's defending against D'Lo Brown, and the crowd is fucking nuclear. And they do not give a shit. And D'Lo beats him for the title, and the place goes nuts. And I'm like, this is a mid-card match for a title that nobody gives a shit about, and everybody's going nuts. And I'm just like, holy shit. It was just insane, man. You could do whatever the fuck you wanted, and people would get over, and the crowd would go nuts. It was insane. And Patrick and I will talk about this from a entertainment standpoint, and I would say a lot of 1999 WWE is not very good, but holy shit, you couldn't tell the crowd that because they're screaming their lungs out at everything that's happening.
Yeah, it's very much 99 WWE to me is very much like 98 WCW, where all the dents in the armor were showing themselves.
Yep.
But they were still kind of riding the creative highs of 97, so the crowds were still red hot for WCW at that point, and they had things like Goldberg and the Wolfpack that got the crowd excited. The difference, though, is that WCW followed it up with 1999, where everything got significantly worse, whereas WWE was able to kind of take Yes, absolutely. And then in 2000, they just became even hotter. So because they got creatively better and they got a better roster, and they were able to kind of ride that wave even further.
Yeah, well, WWE never totally shit the bed like WCW did. Like,
no,
WCW followed, and 98's not even that bad. Like, I mean, it gets worse later in the year, but like, it's not even that bad. 99 is when the shit just falls off, and then 2000, it's just like a child is booking, and then like you get to 2001, and they start to like. Now, I haven't rewatched 2001 since it happened, so I'm going to need to do that at some point. But like, I remember it being like more coherent and normal. I mean, there were things that were weird, like having Goldberg lose to Lex Luger and Buff Bagwell, so he had to retire or whatever. But it seemed like you know, they were getting back on track. But by that point, the damage had been done.
It was way too much damage had been done by that point. It was. I don't know if you could have gotten me back into watching.
Yeah, I mean, like, because WWE had like, they've had bad years. Like 2009, Raw 2009, SmackDown 2009 is actually very good.
Until Taker won the belt.
Yes, yeah, but there's a period from like, I'd say April to like October where like SmackDown 09 is very good. But Raw 09 is like awful. Like, I'm amazed that like, and part of it I guess has to do with there's no competition, right? Like WWE could fuck up and they'd be like, well, I'll go to watch WWE. Whereas WWE fucks up then and they're like, well, I mean, I guess I can watch TNA, but it's called TNA and I'm a fucking adult. So like, I'm not going to do that. And Ring of Honor didn't have the presence. And like, at the end of the day, like, you want to see people you care about. And if WWE's locked them up with their gigantic money, then like, there's not much you can do. But like, yeah, like WWE didn't have as many of those years in a row. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the brand split also kind of helped because typically with the brand split, you get to a point where at least one of the shows is watchable. Yeah. And even now, it's like, if you don't like Raw or SmackDown, you have NXT, which is at least watchable, you know?
Yeah, you have like, I mean, WWE is almost a television of wrestling, and there's multiple channels, and you can pick what you want. Do you want to watch NXT? Okay. Do you want to watch NXT UK? Do you want to watch 205 Live? Do you want to watch Raw or SmackDown? And like, I mean, SmackDown's done a pretty good job with Roman Reigns. I mean, he just got new music, which like finally. I wish they had done at WrestleMania. I think that would have been a much like more monumental appearance for him. But I mean, they're doing all the right stuff with him. I've said it, and people are like fucking confused, and they were like confused at WrestleMania when he won. They're like, well, the good guy should win. I'm like, what good guy is going to beat Roman Reigns? Do you want it to be the about to retire Daniel Bryan, or do you want it to be the 50-year-old Edge? How will we keep it on the 34-year-old or 35-year-old who's in the prime of his life? And when you figure out who the next guy is, you can do it. I mean, but quite frankly, I don't see who the guy is to take it off Roman Reigns. There's this school of thought, and I'm not one of those people, that you just have a guy lose. I don't think you have a guy lose until you have another guy ready to take the spot.
Yeah, and well, that's the whole thing with building a heel champion, is that you ideally would be setting up the perfect face to ultimately take him down. Whether that be Sting in 97 taking down the Hollywood Hogan in the NWO, or that be Austin taking out Shawn Michaels and DX. Ideally, you would have like a ready-made babyface that you can build up over time while the heel is over on the other side building up all of his heat, and then you do the blow-off at the big show. They didn't have, like, in my opinion, and your opinion, they didn't have a strong enough babyface this year, and right now I don't even know who the other guy would be to take down Roman Reigns. The only idea I can even come up with would be they do champion versus champion down the road. At some point they do Lashley versus Reigns, and Lashley would kind of be the de facto face in that situation.
I mean, I think you'd have to have Drew be the face, but my thing, I don't even think this is a good idea. So there's two things. You could have Cesaro, but like Cesaro's 5 years older than Reigns is. Like, so to me, and he's been on TV longer, so there's nothing newer about him than Reigns, and Reigns' persona is newer. So I'm just like, I don't see the upside there. The other thought process, and this doesn't make any sense. The only guy on SmackDown, I mean, I guess you could do Braun, but Braun's like, I think Braun's shown us who he is. Like, he's never going to be that big player guy. You would have to turn Seth face, but Seth is a terrible face generally. His heel character right now is fucking hilarious, and it's great, and he's probably the only guy outside of like Brock or Drew that has the credibility to go against Roman. But like, just like Roman, Seth is a terrible face. Like, Moxley's the best face out of the three, and he's not there anymore. So I don't know what you do. They're both like incredibly, I mean, this is a compliment, they're both incredibly unlikable. And like, you don't want to turn Roman face because he's doing so great as a heel, but you don't want to turn Seth face because he's doing so great as a heel. So you got these two great heels and nothing to do with them, and you can't turn either of them face because it wouldn't work. So it's like, I don't know, you don't have any faces is the bottom line.
What do we always say? WWE is terrible baby faces, and this is a perfect example of it, where it's like on the heel side they're pretty much set, but on the face side it's like, oh shit.
I mean, I guess you could have built up the Fiend, but we saw how that went.
That would have been great. You know what? The Fiend would have been the best option, but they keep pulling the rug out from under him.
Well, you know what, Patrick? He doesn't have 5-star matches. Because if there's something that the mainstream audience cares about, it's having goddamn 5-star matches.
Yes.
Like all those great Attitude Era matches that happened. There were two.
Goldberg. Goldberg had the best matches. Always.
Well, I remember like how bad the wrestling was in the Attitude Era. Like, the storylines were great, but it was mostly like Austin punching people in a crowd. Like, it was the most... Okay, so I'm not defending this. I'm not saying like, oh, ignore people because they have good matches. But I'm also saying, like, from a storytelling standpoint, it's not a prerequisite. Like there are good Steve Austin WrestleMania. I'm sorry, there are good Steve Austin main event matches, but there's also Steve Austin matches where it's him and his opponent, and they're punching each other in the face and hitting each other with soft drinks in the crowd for 72% of the match. And it is not fun to watch. Like, for all the... Man, there's a lot of people who are like, Austin and Rock were just magic. And I'm like, yeah, and there's also a lot of times it's not magic. WrestleMania 15 is, okay, sure. Actually, I don't think it's the best match on the card. I think Shane McMahon and X-Pac is. But it's not the worst match on the card, but it's not a good match. It's like one of the worst WrestleMania main events, I would say, from an actual enjoyment standpoint. Their Backlash match is better, but it's still a lot of like fucking walking and brawling. It wasn't until WrestleMania 17 when they're like, hey, let's have a good match and make it like a big deal. But it didn't matter because people love that shit. I don't know. I don't like it. But guess what? I'm a fucking like hardcore wrestling fan. So what I like, maybe not the barometer for what like Joe regular likes, you know?
Well, I'll give you another example going back to the previous era, the rock and wrestling era. Now, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, you love Hulk Hogan, don't you?
I love him. I love him so much, Patrick. I think he's great.
Okay, there were two matches that Hogan had in his career that perfectly exemplify what you're talking about. And they were both on TV. There was the MTV special, The War to Settle the Score with Roddy Piper, which was centered around... Basically, it was the setup for WrestleMania where Mr. T got involved. And that was where Piper was on the side of the wrestlers that didn't want the celebrities involved. And he kicked Cyndi Lauper in the head. And Hogan was the guy holding the flag for the new era and being that guy. So there was an issue, there was a divide, and you had a heel and a face. And they had a match, and the world completely melted down over a match that under normal circumstances would be considered mundane, probably, because action-wise they didn't do that much. But holy shit, the ratings came in, and they lit up like nobody else. And the other one that I'm thinking of is not the WrestleMania match with Andre, but the rematch they had on the main event.
Yeah.
With the famous angle where Ted walked away with the belt when Andre gave it to him and everything. And again, you have an Andre the Giant that can barely move with one foot in the grave, and a Hulk Hogan that had to go to the top rope and do top rope moves just to have some kind of action in the match for once. But, you know, generally speaking, you're not getting grade A catch-as-catch-can action or wrestling in this match. Didn't matter. It's the most watched wrestling match in the history of television, if I'm not mistaken, with like something insane, like 36 million viewers or something crazy.
I mean, yeah, in recorded, like, I mean, maybe there were some like Gorgeous George matches in the 50s. I don't know how many people had TVs or whatever back then, but yes, for all intents and purposes, it is. I mean, like, and kind of what you said perfectly sums up how I think about like storytelling before the match. If you ever want to hear like stupid wrestling opinions, go to PW Insider and listen to like Dave Shearer or Mike Johnson talk about shit, because they will tell you that every match is a 5-star match before it begins. Fuck you. You don't know anything about anything or storytelling or anything. If you're telling me that a match between, let's say Patrick and I on a fucking independent show, or I'll use a guy I hate, Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage at WrestleMania 5 with a year's worth of build-up and storytelling, and those have equal footing as the bell rings, you are insane. Or you're just, like, obstinate. But every match is not a 5-star match before they begin, because we're in a narrative medium, and you're telling a story before that. So if you've told a compelling story before that, hey, guess what? You have a leg up on the competition. You instantly start at a higher plane. I guess it's theoretically possible that Patrick and I on an independent show, and I'm sorry, I say independent show like it's a knock or something. The real point is it's me versus Patrick on a show. Who gives a shit? For the most part, maybe the 200, 300 people that listen to us. But, there's no way it can stand up to the amount of investment that the Hulk Hogan Randy Savage match had ahead of it. So the idea that a wrestling match is just about the match, it's not. I mean, this isn't a hot take. I'm not telling anything anyone doesn't already know, but the fact is what you do building up to it is almost as important as what you do during it.
And sometimes it's okay to have a popcorn match that doesn't do anything. I think back to the first WrestleMania I watched live, which was WrestleMania 8. And which matches was I completely glued to the TV for? That was Savage and Flair, Piper and Brett, Hogan and Sid, which was the weakest of the three, and Taker and Jake. Those were the 4 matches that I was the most invested in at that age and at that time. When Owen Hart and Skinner came out, that was like, okay, time to go get another soda. Or when Tatanka and Rick Martel went out there, it's like, okay, time to go to the bathroom and, have some fun there. So,
well, I'll tell you how you stop going to the bathroom. You're drinking too many sodas, damn it. But, I think that's a great example, because I think sometimes people take it very far in the other direction. They'd be like, you can have these garbage matches and everything be fine. And I think Brett and Piper and Flair and Savage are a great example of that. Like, Hogan and Sid did not have a good match. Like, it's okay at best. They had a good story leading up to it, kind of. I mean, Sid's the face in that thing, but, whatever. But, you do need to have a story. But once the match starts, you need to pay off that story, however the story is going to be paid off. Flair and Savage did it, and Brett and Piper both did it. They paid off their story. Hogan and Sid, kind of did, but the fact is, you can have the best story in the world if you shit the bed. What I'm not saying is you have a great build-up and then you're garbage in the ring. If you shit the bed, you can lose people. And, when Austin and Rock were brawling and punching and doing those things, I didn't love those matches, but they didn't lose people doing it. If you look at some of these matches, you can lose people. So, it's important for you to have a story that makes people care, but then you do have to take it home.
And, to use further examples, 2 of the most pivotal main events during the Monday Night Wars period was Hogan and Sting at Starrcade 97 and Shawn and Steve at WrestleMania 14. And it's funny, I've heard Steve Austin talk about that match, and he said it was, quote, the drizzling shits. And maybe from a work rate standpoint, it wasn't Shawn's best work, it wasn't Austin's best work, but they did exactly what they needed to do to pay off that storyline and send the fans, quote, send the fans home happy and everything, and put the belt on Austin. As long as they didn't fuck with that, they were going to be okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, I agree with you. And, I've heard both Shawn and Steve talk about that match, and they're disappointed because they had better matches. I've seen their other matches. I know what they're talking about. They're talking about their house show runs in 96. early 96, which are fine, whatever. And then they had a great match at the King of the Ring 97 and such. So they could put together a better athletic matchup. But, like, I would argue that Shawn's injury made that match more compelling. There is a legit pain on his face when he's going through that. And it's almost this villain at the end of a movie where, like, you're getting there, like you, like it's Vader at the end of Jedi, like, or, you know, like I know he's not the villain at the end of Jedi, but you know what I mean, like he's done all he can, and like he's going to die, and you're seeing this slowly happen, and as he gets there, I mean, Shawn's, like, it's not like a surprise that he's going to lose it, but it's like you see it happening, that he's just not able to compete with this new guy. And I mean, there's the back of your mind that Tyson's going to help him, and he's going to get out of it. But of course, the big twist at the end that Tyson and Steve were in on together and they beat him. But, like, I argue that injury enhanced that match. And yeah, are there things like he can't get his feet up for the back body drop? But, like, when fucking JR delivers that back body drop on the champion line and his, like, deep guttural, like he's almost out of breath. It's great, and I would argue that, like, that stuff adds to the drama. And, like, I think they're way too hard on that match.
I agree. I actually really enjoy the match too, but I just think it's funny that two guys who were disappointed in how their match turned out, you know, didn't lose the people. If anything, I think they gained people, they gained fans through that match, regardless of how the performers felt about it. Then the opposite end of that spectrum is Hogan and Sting in Starrcade 97, which, one of the most baffling finishes I've ever seen to any main event, much less one where they had a lot riding on that main event storyline-wise, with almost a year and a half worth of build-up. And to go out on that confusing, hackneyed, terrible finish was just, people still talk about it to this day. And that was, I don't want to say it was the beginning of the end for WCW, but it was the beginning of the tide changing in the war and them losing their footing.
Yeah, it was... Yeah, I mean, we'll wrap up this show soon, but, like, I mean, what hasn't been said about that match, we could repeat it ad nauseum. I think, Bischoff, who has a vested interest in Hogan being friendly with him, is never going to tell you the truth of that match. But, Nick Patrick has, Sting pretty much has, we know what happened in that match. We know why it happened. I think that match, Bischoff has said, like, at the end, the crowd's still cheering for Sting. Like, could we have gotten a larger reaction? And to that I say, Sting was still over after Starrcade 97. People still cheered Sting. But Sting went from a megastar to a superstar. And what do I define a megastar as? I define it as Goldberg in 98. I define it as Steve Austin from 97 to 2000. I define it as The Rock in 2000. I define it as a guy who, I don't think we have any of them today. Maybe Brock when he's there. Maybe Brock. But he's a guy who just transcends and is like, I mean, Sting, when he would come down from those rafters, it was something special. And I mean that term very, very specifically. And once that whole match happened with Hogan, Sting was over. He was a big star. He could draw a rating, but something was missing, and it wasn't the same. And, it wasn't like, let's not use him anymore. He's not a big deal. Of course he's a big deal. He's Sting. He's a big deal, but, wasn't the same. And I think you never want to lose that if you have it. You want to cultivate it. You want to keep it as long as you can. I think WWE did it really well with Steve Austin. I think they kept it, perhaps longer than I've seen anyone keep it, but, you don't get that very often.
And it's funny you mentioned that. I feel the exact same way about how they handled Edge in 2006, where when he won the title after the Money in the Bank cash-in, you really felt like, oh shit, they've stumbled onto something great here. And we'll never know how big it could have gotten if they had won with it.
Because he wasn't even the best heel, Patrick. Triple H was a cooler heel.
Yeah, no. That's the ratings don't suggest that, and the crowd reaction doesn't suggest that. That's my argument.
You know what? To this day, Edge has never gotten to the rating success he had then. Like, it's funny now, and people, and I mean, it's correct.
And he's a legend. We all talk about him. He's a legend and a superstar and everything.
He doesn't move the needle. People talk about it when they'll have like featured stuff on Edge. Like, the ratings will not change. They'll do whatever, and I'll never forget. Like, he pumped those ratings up by like, I don't know, 50%, something insane for that like live sex celebration thing. He got like a 4.6, and I think they were at like 3.4 or something. It was an insane increase. And it was like...
By the way, I love that segment. People shat on it. It's like, that segment's one of the best.
Oh, no, that was great. That was great stuff. You had Flair in there. You had Cena. Like, the whole thing was great. It was like, wow, this is super fresh and cool. And, like, of course, they're like, oh, let's just go back to what we're going to do. And that, to me, was a big difference between WWE during that time and the Attitude Era. If it was the Attitude Era, they would have changed course. They would have gone with the hot hand. In that course, it's like, oh, no, we got Triple H. We got marketing material out for Triple H and Cena at Mania. We got to go with that one.
Yeah, and Edge never fully I mean, he won the belt back later that year, and it's, you know,
it was fine. Yeah, it was fine. He was a champion, but yeah, it was never the same. I agree.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're good. You guys will probably hear this tomorrow or, you know, a few weeks whenever you listen to the podcast. But probably hear it on tomorrow, May 2nd. We also have a new thing we're going to do. We're going to do a Q&A. Patrick's going to let you know the details.
Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, this is a new thing that we've cooked up where you guys get to submit us questions, and you will submit those questions to our email account, weekdaywarriors2020@gmail.com. That will be posted in the description of this video. We will take, depending on how many questions we get, we'll probably read about 5 questions starting next week. We'll do this, and maybe we can make this a weekly thing. We'll see how it goes the first time, and then just kind of go off from there. But go ahead and submit your questions to the email, and we will select a handful of them to read next week, and we will try to make this a regular segment.
Yeah. And, like, I mean, if we don't know the answer, we'll just give our opinions on things, and it'll make for fun stories. So.
Oh, absolutely.
Either way, it'll be good. All right. So, but yes, definitely submit your questions for that. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow. We always appreciate that. Comment in the video. Were we idiots? Did you agree, disagree, thoughts, etc.? Always helpful. We appreciate everyone who does. But for today, I'm Eric Clancy, joined as always by Patrick Kelly, and we are
signing off.